Today we're talking about tradition versus grace, and that's something that is a very big deal, I think, a lot of times, especially in churches, of what you touch and what you do not touch. I remember a pastor friend of mine telling me, he took me around and he showed me his church one day. Matter of fact, this happened a few different times. Took me around and showed me his church, and he was telling me about this organ they had. He said, look at this organ. It's absolutely beautiful. And had the pipes, a real pretty pipe organ. He said, isn't this amazing? They said it cost over $100,000. And they would tell me about it, how much it cost all the time. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I said, how good does it sound? He goes, I've never heard it. And I said, what? And he said, never heard it. He said, there's one person that plays it. And I said, don't you play the piano and the organ? He said, yes, but they won't give me the key. I'm not allowed to touch it. I was like, you're the pastor of the church. He was like, I'm not in charge, though, I'll tell you that. Another pastor takes me around, he's showing me his church, and he takes me to a place, he said, this is the gym in here. And I said, well, why is it locked up? It got a padlock on it. And he said, they told me I'm not allowed to go in there. I was like, why? He said, I don't know. It's some kind of rule, and they've only got a few people that are allowed to go in there. I thought, how absolutely weird is that? Why would a church have those restrictions that are on there? We all have got one of them, but when we were up in Washington, I remember having a day, they made a rule when they were handing out cookies before the church. You could only get one cookie. You were not allowed, or you could get two cookies. You weren't allowed to get three or four. And people would go up there, kids would get them, and I understand. They had them, kids would steal them. But a guy was visiting the church one day, came for a baptism, watching somebody be baptized, and he came up there, and he grabbed 3 cookies, and a guy spat at his hand, told him, no, you're only allowed to have 2 cookies. And he looked at him, and he goes, I don't think I'll ever be back at this church. A lot of times traditions, they get in the way a little bit of understanding what grace really is. I want to read to you some silly laws I've read and studied up on, and I wanted to know if they were absolutely true, so I had to look them up and find out if these things were true, and I wanted to learn a little bit of the reason why. Let me give you some silly laws that are out there. It is illegal to let your chickens cross the road in Quitman, Georgia. The reason is because a lot of times they were getting ran over. Why did the chicken cross the road? Because the cars were coming very fast and they had to hurry. It is illegal to change, or it was illegal to change a light bulb unless you are a licensed electrician in Victoria, Australia. It is a legal requirement to smile at all times except at funerals or hospitals in Milan, Italy, if you are in public. It is illegal to pass wind. Some of you guys hear this. It is illegal to pass wind in a public place after 6 p.m. on a Thursday in Florida, and it's never been repealed at all. I would like to know how they uphold that. It's against the law to have a sleeping donkey in your bathtub after 7 p.m. in Arizona. You know why? This is real. You know why that happened? It's because a guy had a donkey in the 1920s that would get in and he would let sleep in the bathtub. One night while the man was asleep, the donkey kicked on the water and it flooded the whole area and went down the street. And they were like, that's it. No more donkeys in the tubs after 7 o'clock. So some of you guys, be glad you live in Texas. You must let anyone use your toilet if they ask in Scotland. That's a good one. In Samoa, it's illegal to forget your wife's birthday. Let me read just the quote the commentator said. Some of you applauding. Oh my goodness. Let me read this commentary's quote. He said, you will get more than silent treatment from your wife if you forget her birthday in Samoa. It's unclear how long your sentence would be, but maybe some time apart for you to think about how you need to make it up to her wouldn't be too bad. It is a legal requirement to own a burial plot before you die in a town in France. Now, isn't that weird? And there's a lot of them in the United States that some are just absolutely silly, and there's probably no way to uphold them, but these are ones that are actually upheld. There are times when we're looking at certain things in Scripture that we don't understand, but there's usually a reason behind why. I want you guys to look with me in this passage in Matthew chapter 12, starting in verse 1. At that time, Jesus passed through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pick and eat some of the heads of grain. But when the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." He said to them, "Haven't you read what David did when he and those who were with him were hungry? How he entered the house of God, and they ate the sacred bread, which is not lawful for him or for those with him to eat, but only for the priests? Or haven't you read in the law that on the Sabbath day the priests in the temples violate the Sabbath and are innocent? But I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath." Moving on from there, he entered the synagogue, and there he saw a man with a paralyzed hand. And in order to accuse him, they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" But he said to them, "What man among you, if he had a sheep that fell into a pit on the Sabbath, would take hold of it and lift it out? A man is worth far more than a sheep, so it's lawful to do what is good on the Sabbath." Then he told the man, "Stretch out your hand." So he stretched it out, and it was restored as good as the other. But when the Pharisees went out and plotted against him, how they might destroy him. So there was a charge that is being brought up, and the charge is this: violating the Sabbath tradition. Now we know the Lord set up and he established the Sabbath day. In Genesis 2:1 it says, "So the heavens and the earth and everything in them were completed. And by the seventh day God completed his work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, for on it he rested from his work of creation." I believe that those days are literal days. I believe the word yom equals what is a 24-hour period. And I believe that on the seventh day, he truly was in a point of resting. Now, did God need to rest? No. Did he establish it and set up the Sabbath for a day of rest? Absolutely. It was something that was supposed to be done and something that they were going to hold to. But we don't necessarily still practice the Sabbath. That's not something that we overly do or that we research or even really truly understand about it. A day of rest would absolutely be good for some of us, though. 6 kids, you know what I'm saying? A day of rest would be great, but that's not how it works a lot of times. There is a Sabbath tradition that is going on during this particular time that has taken what the Lord has set apart for a Sabbath day, putting into a place, even in the commandments, the law of the Lord, putting it in place, and the Pharisees have taken it and expounded on it so much more and have made it such a big issue. For instance, you were not allowed, you could pick grain if you were hungry to eat, but if you took grain and you rubbed your hands together with it, that was winnowing, and you were in violation of the Sabbath, according to them. Or if you took it, winnowed it, threw it up in the air to get the shaft to blow away and to come down with the grain, you were in violation. Or what about this? You could not carry anything across the street with your right or your left hand unless you put it on the back of your hand and carried it, or it was tied to your shirt, or you were able to hold it with your ear. You could carry it. There is even in Israel not long ago a story of a house that was burning down across the street, and this family in absolute debate, it was on a Sabbath, can we pick up the phone and call for help or can we not? One of their rabbis lived next door in the building, and they asked him the question, can we call? And the rabbi and the people debated until the whole house burnt down. Now, how silly is that? The violation that was going on, the ideas of the Sabbath, the Pharisees and those of the religious leaders at the time, there was 39 categories of Sabbath laws. Could you imagine having to fulfill those all? Never to violate them? Man, what a struggle. And then there's a defense that the Lord gives, the accusation that they have violated the law by picking up the grain and eating them. And then the Lord gets into a defense with them. Jesus comes into a defense, and the defense is the Lord is above their tradition. Let me read this in verses 3 through 8. He said to them, "Haven't you read what David did when he and those who were with him were hungry? How he entered the house of God, and they ate the sacred bread, which is not lawful for him or for those with him to eat, but only for the priest? Or haven't you read in the law that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple violate the Sabbath and are innocent? But I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath." So let me tell you what he does here in his defense. One is he challenges the knowledge, their knowledge, the Pharisees' knowledge of God's Word. He issues it right off the bat whenever they speak of David, when he says, "Haven't you read what David did? And those that were with him, hungry, how he entered the house of God and he ate." It was a challenge. Nobody would dare speak against David during this time. David, who is the lineage of the kingdom, who's going to have the Messiah come from him, the one that was set up, David, the great hero. Nobody would dare speak against him, but David violated the Sabbath. And the Lord knew it, and so he challenges them on this. You know it. This is what was said. And so he goes straight after them. You're mad that the Pharisees have picked this, but yet David himself violated it. Let me tell you the story here. This is in 1 Samuel 21:3. And it says, "Now, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever can be found." And the priest told him, "There is no ordinary bread on hand. However, there is consecrated bread, but the young man may eat it only if they have kept themselves from women." David answered him and said, "I swear that women are being kept from us. And as always, when I go out to battle, the young men's bodies are consecrated even on an ordinary mission. So of course their bodies are consecrated today." So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, for there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from the presence of the Lord. When the white bread was removed, it had been replaced with warm bread. Now, here's what happened. David was running from Elimelech and Saul, and he gets into this place. He lies to a priest. He's running for his life. He's eating bread that was consecrated to the Lord. So let me explain this. David, the great hero, lies, steals, and breaks the Sabbath. And Jesus uses this as an illustration to him. These Pharisees that idolize him, that build him up so much. He said, "Did you not know in Scripture that David himself had violated this?" Who? He's going after him. He's challenging him on the very word of God. And here they are. They don't know what the defense is, and they don't know how to answer it. They don't know how to reply, because you can't rebuke what David was to them. It would be like much in a Catholic church right now, if the Catholics were to speak anything against the Pope, it would be a criticism that you should not do. It would be very taboo to do that within the church. But yet here they are, Jesus using David himself to challenge the very knowledge of the Pharisees. A lot of people think that they really know the Word of God. You know how I know? Because they use this statement all the time. "Judge not, lest ye be judged." I hear it all the super smart theologians out there, they come after anybody that says any judgment or stands up against any. Judge not, lest ye be judged. Not understanding that there's actually a reason why that's in place, and not understanding that we can absolutely see what sin is and not sin, understanding that there is absolutely a challenge with it, knowing that it was you cannot judge the eternity and salvation of somebody, but you can definitely speak what truth is and understand. Oh, great theologians, they don't like to be challenged on their theology either. They don't like it to be in a place, I tell Heather one time. We had this crazy story, but these motorcycle gangs had a restaurant, and I loved eating there, and I was told by people, don't go eat there, don't go talk to them. It's a front, a drug-running front. And I was like, well, whatever, they got good eggs. And so I would show up. My tummy speaks for me all the time. And so I'd go in there, and I was eating it, and they would talk to me. They would pray with me. They would talk to me about some of the Bandito stuff and everything else. And they were grumpy. They did all sorts of stuff and kind of fought and everything else. And one day they were showing me pictures. They had these cars for sale and were showing me them outside, and they had some more old cars. And so I was flipping through on their phone, looking at them. They were showing me, and I flipped through, and there they are in KKK outfits. And I was like, I'm never going back. I'm not going to do it. And so for weeks, I wouldn't go back. And one day they see me at another restaurant, and they come up to me, and they said, Dallas, have we done something to you? You won't come? And I remember talking with Heather that week, and I was telling her how furious I was, furious that I saw them in there. And she said, you knew they were banditos and do all this bad stuff, right? I was like, yeah. And you knew that they had gotten in fights and gotten in trouble in our community all the time, right? I said, yeah. And they would pray and ask you to pray with them, right? Yeah. And she said, but now their sin is so great, you won't go back there. And I remember looking at her going, I don't want to talk to you either. And we get like that, right? Like we get this idea that we're so much more justified than anybody else. We're so much smarter, and we have so much more wisdom. And Jesus just shut down the Pharisees. Don't you remember what David did? He challenges them with knowledge of the Word. Then, not only that, he challenges their very idea, their legalistic view of God's Word. And he comes after them, and he says this in verses 5 through 6. He said, or haven't you read in the law that on the Sabbath day the priest in the temple violate the Sabbath, and yet they are innocent? Like, don't you understand this is what happened? But I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. The very priests that are set up that we use are in violation of that very first situation of the Sabbath day. You are holding this to a legalistic view instead of understanding what grace is. Do you understand what a legalistic view is? It's sitting there saying, if you violate this at all, ever, you're wrong. I was telling in Sunday school class that there was a time here at the church that Criswell College was coming, and they were going to do a little presentation with pastors around. And I remember Brother Randy that was here. He invited me to come and to hear him. And there was a preacher in town at a Southern Baptist church that was so King James only. This is what it was. Anybody else that preached anything else is a sin. And he came that day ready for a fight. And he came in, and right when the presentation was starting, he said, I've got something to say. I want to know what Bible you are teaching of at the Criswell College. And the recruiter, the speaker, says, well, we just go to the Greek and Hebrew of the original text. And the guy sat there quiet, and he goes, well, I guess that'll do then. Okay. Legalistic view, it gets in what you can dress, what you can wear, the things that you can speak, the way that you do things in a church, if you grab more than one cookie. And it gets in the way a lot of times of what God is doing. Look at this in Leviticus 6:12, where it was all set. Even the Word of God put a place for the priest that would have been violation of the Sabbath. Leviticus 6:12. The fire on the altar is to be kept burning. It must not go out. Every morning, the priest, by the way, does that say 6 days in the morning? Every morning, the priest will burn wood on the fire. He is to arrange the burnt offering on the fire and burn the fat portions from the fellowship offerings on it. Fire must be kept burning on the altar continually. It must not go out. Now, there's laws that we could sit there and we could try to say, it's not legalistic. For instance, do not tell a lie. Like, that makes sense, right? Like we would tell our kids that all the time. We don't want them to lie. Do not steal. That makes sense. Like we don't want you to steal anything. What about this? Do not commit murder. That's very logical. Don't do this. But yet, keep the Sabbath day holy, and the challenge that comes. And for many of us, we sit there and say, well, that's Sunday, I keep it holy. But that would have been a change of what the original Sabbath was. And it's good to keep a day holy. There's no doubt about it. Absolutely. But even the priests at this particular time would have been in violation of the Sabbath established by God's law. And the Bible is not contradictory to itself. What it was giving the illustration of is saying there are some exceptions that come into play right here. There are times that I have sat with military people that have challenged me and have said, man, I was setting in war and I know for a fact what we were doing at that particular time was murder. Is it justified? There are times that missionaries go out and they smuggle Bibles into other countries and they ask them questions and they kind of lie to get in there. Is it justified? Or would we hold the great legalistic approach of just sitting there saying, if you ever kill, even in war, you're going to hell. If you violate and tell a fib getting into another country to hand out the Bible, go into hell. It's a tough balance, isn't it? I believe the Word of God is the Word of God, but yet there was moments God allowed for certain things in the challenge of the law. He challenges their legalistic view, and then he challenges their compassion in light of God's Word. Look at this in verse 7 through 8. If you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. So he's challenged their knowledge of God's Word. He's challenged their legalistic viewpoints of it. And now he is challenging the compassion in light of God's Word. Do you think that can happen? That people can be so knowledge, but they do not have compassion and love. I think so. I think so. I think there's people that can hold things so smart and understand so much knowledge, they can't show grace. Like a friend of mine who was at a conference one time. Rick Warren was coming to speak, and if you guys, anybody knows Rick Warren, he's the pastor of Saddleback Church, and there's been lots of controversy and struggles with him, and I'm not getting into that. But he was coming to speak, and he was giving a history of the Anabaptists and how they were pre what any of the Reformation was called, and they weren't a part of it, and Protestant movement. And anyways, it was a real enlightening, great discussion, and my buddy was giving me updates on it, and then he said something. He said they went out, he had a phone call, and he went out to answer it, and all of a sudden 2 professors come out of the seminary, and they come out, and the 2 professors are talking, and they said, well, Rick is a great practitioner of the Lord, but he is no theologian. And my buddy, he messaged me and he was talking about it, and he said, think about that. Would you rather have all the knowledge, that you understand everything, or like in 1 Corinthians 13 said, have all knowledge, but don't have love? You gain nothing. How great would it be to be a practitioner of God's love, understanding very little? Now, I think we should have knowledge and love. I think that would be great. That's why we come to church. That's why we have studies. We can grow, make disciples. It's something that we are supposed to grow with. But if you were going to have the two, The knowledge of God's love, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him but not perish, have everlasting life. I think that's very knowledgeable. In Africa right now, there is a preacher I know who has written 8 sermons, and he will go out to a certain place, to a village, and all these preachers from surrounding villages will come over to him, and he will hand out the sermons, and they will go back and they will preach them in their village. Do you know why? Because they do not have Bibles in their own language. And therefore, they have to read his writings to preach. They can't increase in this great knowledge, but they're faithful to preach the word that they know. The idea of compassion in light of God's word. I tell you, something greater than the temple is even here. Saying it's Jesus, it is the love. Somebody that established what the Sabbath was. If you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Oh, that's got to make them mad. That he is the Son of God. In the beginning was the Word was with God. He was with God in the beginning. Established what the very Sabbath was. And as if the Pharisees are challenging, they're challenging the one that set it all into place. What about this? There's an example that he shows on this, and it's a healing on the Sabbath. It says, moving on from there, he entered the synagogue, and there he saw a man who had been paralyzed and had a paralyzed hand. And in order to accuse him, they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? But he asked them, what man among you, if he had a sheep that fell into a pit on the Sabbath, wouldn't take hold of it and lift it out? A man is worth far more than a sheep, so it is lawful to do what is good on the Sabbath. Then he told the man, stretch out your hand. So he stretched it out, and it was restored as good as the other. Imagine a man sick and dying right in front of him. It wasn't just a paralyzed hand, but imagine somebody else sick and dying, and the Lord looking at him saying, I will have no compassion on you today. It's the Sabbath. Challenging the Pharisees in their very example, showing them, if you're going to accuse me, I'm going to give you examples and challenge you on your knowledge of the Scripture, on the fact of your legalistic views, on the reality of not understanding love in light of the Scripture. Now I'm going to show you what I can do. Ooh. Jesus is showing that he's above man's tradition. And Jesus is showing what love looks like. I've often wondered if Jesus was to come back and sit around right now. Have you heard the story, the illustration of this man that was sitting outside of the church? And while he was sitting out there, homeless, nasty, smelled, looked grungy, everybody was coming into church. And he just sat there quietly, and people would come by, and nobody would look at him. Nobody would talk to him, and he would see that when they would walk off, they'd start whispering about him. And they kept doing this, everybody. Not one person spoke to him. Not one person invited him to come inside. It was at, what is the church in Lynchburg, Virginia? It was Falwell's church, but it was outside of it. And anyways, he's sitting out there, and he's doing it, and he comes into the church on that Sunday morning, and they're waiting for the guest preacher to preach. And while he's sitting in the back, he stands up and he starts walking down the aisle, and he pulls off his wig, and he starts changing his shirt and pulls off everything, and he gets up, and it was the great Roy Fish, the great preacher from Southwestern Seminary, that was coming to stand in there to preach. And he said, I think we know what we're going to talk about today. I wondered if Jesus came and he looked at us in our traditions a lot of times, would he ever sit there and say, you missed the point? I've been in churches where they're mad that people wear shorts to come in. And I knew a guy that was all he owned. And he came dressed the best he could, and people would get mad at him. Or people come into church and they've been homeless and they smell, and people move from the area of where they are. People come in and they were the banditos, and everybody looked down on them when they came in. Whisper and gossip came. Somewhere along the way, it's easy to think that we're so much better than God's grace. But I look around and I see we're just a bunch of sinners redeemed by God. Preached a service the other day. One of the sweetest ladies that I'd probably ever met. She was a super kind lady, Dorothy Hensley. I mean, kind. She would come out when she'd be at the back, and she'd have her walker, and she would encourage me every time she came back and talk about the sermon. It was so sweet. And we did her sermon, and now she was ornery, there was no doubt, but there was nothing that showed sinfulness, right? But even that sweet lady was not perfect. That Jesus had to die for her sins too. He showed compassion. And you know what? I bet there's a few people that were probably saved on the Sabbath day. Jesus is showing that he's compassionate. The man that is sitting there paralytic. Could you imagine the man too if he was so legalistic and he's like, whoa, come back tomorrow and heal my hand? No. Just so grateful to have his hand restored. So we got the charge, violating the Sabbath. We got the defense, the Lord is above tradition. We got the example of healing on the Sabbath. And then we got the response. And look at how they respond. But the Pharisees went out and plotted against him, how they might destroy him. They rejected the Lord. It's not a practicing what we preach. Grace and love and mercy and even speaking truth. This is a legalistic view of my ideas are higher than the Word of God. And it comes into a battle. It's a challenge. It's why there's certain people, even now, with a Pharisaical mind, that tradition and the things they hold to are so much more important than anything else. It's part of the reason I'm hot, but I sit there and I was thinking, you know what? I wonder if I preached without a jacket, if anybody would say something. I remember not preaching in a suit one time. Oh, can't believe you didn't do that. I don't look good in a suit. And none of my suits fit right now either. Because I've lost so much weight. Could you imagine those Pharisaical attitudes that get in the way of God's love? Could you imagine standing at the door and not allowing somebody to come in? One of my favorite evangelists of all time is a preacher named Junior Hill. And Junior Hill, old school, mountain, kind of hillbilly-ish evangelist. And Junior Hill was telling the story when he was going to seminary in Louisiana Southern Seminary, New Orleans Seminary. And while he was down there, he would go preach on the weekends up in Arkansas, and he would have to drive up, and he would come on a Saturday or a Friday night. He'd get his hair cut on Saturday morning. He'd preach on Sunday, and then they would drive back and do it all again. And he said one time they were having a fellowship after Sunday service, and they were sitting in there, and it was in the late 50s, maybe early 60s, and they're sitting in the fellowship hall, and somebody came up to him and said, "Brother Junior, what do you think about those black people wanting to come in and worship with us?" And he said, "Oh, I don't think God would mind at all if people of different skin came together and worshiped." The next week, he came back and he goes to the barber shop like he would do every single week. And he walked in and the barber looks at him and says, "Brother Junior, what are you doing here?" He said, "I'm coming to get my hair cut." And he said, "No, what are you doing in town?" He said, "I'm coming to preach like I do every week." And he said, "Brother Junior, did nobody get a hold of you?" He said, "What?" He said, "They fired you on Sunday night for saying that you would let black people come and worship with us." Said he drove home with his wife so discouraged. And they drove through the night, and next morning they find this little bitty country church out in the middle of nowhere. And he said that they went in. He said the church was so excited to have people come in. By the way, a church of different races, different people in there. He said that music minister got up there to sing. He said he could barely croak his way through a song. Terrible. And that preacher got up there and he stumbled and he fumbled and he struggled. He said, but he was faithful to the text. He said it was the sweetest worship he had ever been a part of. You can have all knowledge, but if you have love, you gain, or don't have love, you gain nothing. Your attitudes, your heart, think of this. Paul says, I would rather know nothing else than Jesus Christ and Him crucified, as he speaks to the people. Brilliant and knowledgeable. But that was what mattered. You got the question, would you rather be that great theologian or the great practitioner of God's love? Dear Heavenly Father, I come to you right now and I ask you to speak to our hearts, even for those that are in here right now that they don't know you. God, here is what love was. You sent your Son down to this earth, the very one to speak, saying something greater than the temple is here. It was the sacrifice for all mankind to spare us from hell, to forgive us of sins, to give eternal life to us. Lord, maybe there's those that are in here and they've never experienced that kind of love. They've never really looked at it and seen that their sins are exposed, that they'll never be good enough on their own. But Jesus paid the price for them. Lord, I pray that they would get out of their own head and surrender to you. A 17-year-old boy, Lord, has been to church for most of his life here. But it was today, in a parking lot, that he was truly saved. We can have knowledge, but do we have the love of Jesus Christ? Lord God, I ask you to speak with us and challenge us as there's moments that we have the Pharisaical view that we're so much better than others, or the way we do things are so much more correct. Lord, would you challenge us today? Even the idea of looking down on others. We have the grace and light of Jesus Christ. Lord, maybe there's those that want to be a part of a church that just wants to love. Maybe they need to come be a part. Whatever you need to do in our life right now, would you challenge us? Speak to us. Draw us close to you. Lord, may we walk in grace, not over tradition, but following you. Lord, we love you. In Jesus' name.